First one, Paul Lux is going to give us a little update from supervisory elections. Mr. Lux.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. So I was asked to come tonight to talk about the potential of, there's some interest on the part of some city council members to talk again about moving your election date and what that would entail, or how we arrived at where we are right now for universal municipal election day. So just want to give you a little bit of the background and then talk about what happens going forward. So my predecessor, Pat Pollerin, who originally came up with the idea of having universal municipal election day, sat down with the cities. City of Destin, by some irony, was the ones who sort of initiated the discussion. And the benefits to why we have a universal municipal election day. The first one is shared costs for my staff and my overtime, for those staff for the elections, poll worker training, all of those things, that the associated costs of an election that can be shared are actually divided up among the cities. Each city doesn't pay those costs individually. Having universal municipal election day gives you, the cities, the full attention of me and my staff, because we are not pulled in a different direction for state and national elections. Provides less confusion for the voter, because they know second Tuesday in March is when we vote for our city officials. So it provides a little bit less confusion. Is it going to be on November? Is it not going to be on November? Who will be on the ballot? That kind of thing. And because of that, it gives better media attention for you, the candidates who are running for offices. You are not lost in the cacophony of the state or national election that goes on around a November election. Now, one of the benefits in the initial discussions were that it would lead to increased participation or turnout, and of course, I think we don't need to argue that point, that was not necessarily the case, as we've discovered. But it also removes from you, the city, the complexity of elections and puts it in the hands of me and my professional staff who have been running elections now for over 20 years. It also, there's a lengthy candidate qualifying and reporting that some cities do take on and manage themselves, and I'll talk about that in a second. And we also handle, as a result of that, all of the absentee requirements and all of the little niggly points in law that surround not only absentee ballot requirements for regular voters, but also the state and federal laws that surround ballots for our military and overseas voters. So as a consequence of the cities, the 7 of the 9 cities voting to do so, we proceeded, and Chapter Law 92-270, a special legislative act created by the Florida legislature, to create universal municipal election day for Okaloosa County. So 7 of the 9 municipalities joined as part of that special act. The 8th, Valparaiso, joined by ordinance after the fact, giving us 8 of the 9, and I'm pleased to say that Niceville most recently joined as well. So we do have all 9 of them now, minus a couple which I'll talk about in a second. So that's the second Tuesday in March. Why did we pick the second Tuesday in March? Second Tuesday in March is historically when the presidential preference primary has been. Now, because of politics, that thing started getting seesawed around and back and forth. Doesn't impact Fort Walton Beach necessarily, because your elections are held in odd-numbered years, but for those municipalities whose elections are held in even-numbered years, it's a cost savings for them to appoint having their election held in conjunction with the PPP when it comes around once every 4 years. And it also does something very important, which is establishes me as your filing officer and administrator for the election. Now, so why change? And that's usually the question. And the answer I normally hear from people when they say we want to move our election to November is we would like higher turnout. And I promise you, if you move your election to November, you will absolutely get higher turnout. Why? Because turnout is based on the number of people who were given an opportunity to vote in your race. Doesn't mean they did, doesn't mean they care to or want to, or even go looking on the back of page 2 for your race. It just means they were given an opportunity to vote in that race, whether they took it or not. So I mentioned lengthy candidate reporting. Unfortunately, so right now, qualifying is the 71st to the 67th day prior to Election Day. which is what the statute sets forth. But if you move to a November-based election, qualifying for that election actually is 67th to the 71st day prior to the primary election, which you are not in, and now you, the candidate, will be required to file all of the campaign reports that come along with being part of both a primary, which you're not running in, and a general election cycle, because that is the established qualifying period for a November election. We don't just move your qualifying period closer to November because we're not allowed to do that. Another problem that eventually occurs, and we're going to start seeing better data on this, is what we call voter drop-off. So, as I mentioned, the turnout, which is going to improve, is based on the number of people who are given an opportunity to vote in your race. How many people go, in point of fact, to the end of all of the judicial merit retention questions, and at the bottom of the school board and judicial races, looking for municipal races, looking to vote for municipal candidates. Or, as in your last election when you had 13 people on the ballot, you've all seen what my November ballot looks like. Where do you think a race as big as 13 candidates is going to fit on the front of my card? And the answer is it won't. It will go to the back of the card if it doesn't force things to a second card. So what does the SOE still do if you vote to move your election to November? Well, the first thing I do is wash my hands of it, because if you remove yourselves from the special act that created me as the administrative person to run your elections, I no longer have any responsibility to run your elections. It now falls on you, the city, to do so. So good luck. But that does not mean that, I throw you out with the bathwater and we don't ever talk to you again. So Destin went through this process. I explained all of this to the city of Destin when Destin voted to move their election away from Universal Municipal Election Day and to to the November election. So the first time that we got to experience that was the 2020 November election. And I did some of the statistical digging just to figure out what's going on. So to give you a measure of the percentage of turnout change, so with the presidential preference primary in 2016, they had a 46.3% turnout for their race. And in a vote for 4 race with the eligible number of voters who could vote, 77.4% of people cast ballots in that race. That was in the presidential preference primary, around the same time. Usually they jimmied it around, but the 2016, I think, was still near the second Tuesday in March. The 2018 municipals, which would have been the last time we did a regularly scheduled municipal election for City of Destin, they had a 31.6% turnout. But of the available votes to be cast in that vote for 3 race, 83.7% votes were cast in that race. Fast forward to the 2020 general, they had a vote for 4 race. Their turnout, a whopping 81.5%. Would anyone care to guess why? This was a presidential election year. How many votes were actually cast in that race? Of the availability in a vote for 4 race to cast ballots, only 59.1% of votes were cast in that race. So when I talk about voter drop-off, and then fast forward to the 2022 general election, which we just had, we didn't even have a Destin race. Now here's the irony. So when we did candidate qualifying in 2020, the first phone call I had from a candidate in Destin who was mad was, why did I have to qualify in June when my race isn't until November? We normally qualify a lot closer to the election. This was an incumbent, by the way, who voted to move it. And I told them, I explained this to you when I spoke to you about what the ramifications of moving it were. So they went through the process. When they went through the process, they went to the Attorney General because me and my attorney agreed that the special act trumped their city charter and that they couldn't undo it without undoing the special act or doing it legislatively. The Attorney General disagreed and sided with them, and so they went through the process. Now in January of 2020, I met with the Board of County Commissioners because, as you well know, and as your finance people can certainly tell you, I have to pass by law 100% of the cost of the municipal elections back to you. The rest of the Okaloosa taxpayers do not pay for your elections. However, I had to present the Board of County Commissioners then with what our 3 options were, and they overwhelmingly voted 5-0 to accept option 2, which says the county will absorb the cost of conduct for municipal elections, including any additional ballot cards that may be generated if your race forces constitutional amendments, etc., to a second card. The legal ads are still the responsibility of the municipality. That doesn't change. And as an option, candidate qualifying or campaign finance filing can still be contracted with my office to continue doing those services for you if you wish to do so, but we have to do it by contract. Now, I can tell you that since the county made that decision in January of 2020, now the city of Crestview has voted to move their election to coincide with the November election. If Fort Walton Beach decides to vote to do the same thing, I am going to have to go back to the county commissioners, because it's one thing to agree to pay for a second card in an election that only holds 4 precincts. But now that better than half of the precincts in the county, I am going to have to go back to the commissioners to see if that is still their wish for my budget to absorb the cost of that, because I cannot, in good conscience, pass that back to the taxpayer without running it back past the commissioners in the first place. So I just wanted to let you guys know where that stands. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer it, or otherwise, if something comes up later, of course, you know you can always call me or email me.
Questions from council, Mr. Lodge?
Mr. Mayor? What are we currently paying your office to host our election compared to what would we be paying your office if it was moved to November? Rough estimate.
So, rough estimate, you guys up to about 15, 17, 18, and the cost of legal ads only. And again, if you opted, so City of Destin has opted to coordinate with me and pay me to do their candidate filings as well, which is the contract currently is $500 or $100 per candidate, whichever is more. So in your most recent race, for example, that cost back to the city would have been $1,300 for the 13 candidates that had to be wrangled, no offense. Plus the cost of the legal ads, which typically run about $3,000 to $4,000.
Further question?
If there's no other questions, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Go ahead.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to motion for staff to bring us back a ordinance for presentation moving our current election date to the November general election date.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilman Schmidt, seconded by Councilman DeBerry, to have staff bring back an ordinance to move our election date to November, to coincide with November elections. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Right.
Mr. Lux, thank you for presenting and giving us this information, a lot of information to chew on, as well as to, this facts about voter fatigue and voter drop-off, which we all recognize our city elections would be on the back page. But I do have to believe that voter turnout, that makes the candidate have to work that much harder to get out and touch more people. And I think that's important for the future of this city and future for all candidates that are running, to make sure they got to go touch and get out and engage with their vision and their message to more people than I think our record-breaking high was most recently at 17%. I could be wrong with that number, but that was where we were at this past elections. That's why I'm making that motion, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett, comment?
No, I agree.
Anyone else in council wish to speak?
Yeah, I'd like to see the cost factors in detail before we have this come back to us, if it should pass. That's a request. And the motion doesn't address the need to extend the terms of office.
I think when staff brings us back that information in that ordinance, it's gonna show what the impacts that it would make to this current term and how that.
But that would, I think, require a charter amendment. Am I
Mr.
correct?
Douglas?
Well, looking at that, I believe it was extended, I think Destin extended theirs in the ordinance. I mean, the rule is that it would extend. I'll look at both of those as part of the process before we bring that. And if that's something that needs to be addressed at referendum, we'll let the council know that.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
Just to help the attorney out, he's looking for AGO 2019-11.
Correct.
Which is the AGO opinion where they were told they could move it by simple ordinance rather than by charter.
Thank you, sir. Anyone from the public wish to comment?
Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
I wish to comment. So I'm not going to support this motion. I know we've talked about this quite a few times here on the council over the years. I just really, and Mr. Lux, I think, kind of hit the nail on the head as an expert in this field, no bigger expert really in our county than the guy who's been running our elections for 20 years. It really allows our citizens to focus on municipal issues, municipal candidates solely, outside of all of the other things that are going on in a state, county, or presidential election. I think it's important that we keep that, but obviously I probably will not win this one, so we'll see how it goes.
But this is just a motion to bring back the material for further
No,
discussion.
I understand the motion.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not going to support it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Council, please vote. It does pass 6-1, so staff will bring back an ordinance for our consideration the next meeting, I believe. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mr. Lux. Thank you very much.
Thank you.